Hello everyone, welcome to workshop number 6 of our beginner track, first person shooter part 2, and I'm Ryan. So before we get started, make sure to install the skeleton package, but only if you didn't do part 1. So if you did part 1, you're going to want to make sure to copy over some of the tutorial scripts for part 2. And you can always follow along on our GitHub repository, and our slides are linked as well. So for a brief overview, we're going to be going over raycasting and visual effects, and we'll be talking about projectiles, but we aren't going to be actually implementing them in the tutorial. So just again, follow along on the GitHub README. Provide a lot of detailed instructions all in one place. Make sure to have the package installed if you haven't done if you didn't do part 1, or if you just want to just download the package, might be a little easier. And don't hesitate to ask questions if you're confused. Our tutorial help channel in our Discord is open, and we'll take any questions you guys may have regarding this tutorial or Unity in general. So first, we're going to be going over shooting. So the type of shooting that there are, so there's two main types. There's raycasting and projectiles. So raycasting is reticle over enemy will equal to an instant hit. So it's like just typical FPS shooting. Like when you're shooting a gun, if you hover over an enemy and press shoot, then it's going to immediately automatically detect a hit if your reticle is on an enemy. So this is done through our physics.raycast function, or Unity's physics.raycast function. So it produces a ray from a point, and it returns if a ray intercepts with the collider. So basically what this means is that raycasting is going to generate just a ray from like your gun point, from the barrel of your gun. It's going to produce an instantaneous ray that shoots towards the direction in which your gun is facing, or just in general the direction that you want to face. And if it intercepts with any collider, it's going to return whatever that in which it intercepts with. So some other things with physics.raycast, there's layer mask, so you can ignore certain colliders. For example, if you're shooting a gun and there's like leaves in the way and they have certain colliders, you can ignore that because you don't want your bullet stopping at certain leaves. Additionally, there's a max distance option, so you can limit how far the ray travels in case you don't want your gun shooting extraordinarily long distances. So moving on to projectiles. So this is spawning in a moving bullet, which and whenever this bullet collides with an enemy, it'll equal a hit. So here we can create projectile prefabs. So these are like our pre-designed bullets, and we can design movement strips that start on spawn, which means that whenever we want to spawn a projectile, we want to spawn it with certain movement functionality, and it'll be spawned by our gun. So whenever we press the shoot button when we're using projectiles, a gun or a bullet with a pre-designed prefab will just emit from that, and this bullet will often have its own components, so it can like collide with different objects and register collisions through that way. Now moving on to visual effects, first there's a line render, which is a hit scan bullet trail effect. So if you want to create an effect based on the ray that you're casting, you could create a bullet trail effect through the line render. So the line render component will visualize the line, specify and start end positions of how you want the line to be, and you can specify the color and width. So you can make the line kind of how you want it to be. So if you want like interesting strange patterns with your line render, or with your line that you're creating, you can go ahead and customize as much as you want. Moving on to the trail render, so you can create a bullet trail effect. So it's kind of like if you're shooting maybe like a rocket or something, you want some smoke to come out of it, you can use the trail render to create that effect. So you can give a tail to a moving object, and specify its color and width. So you can basically just change how you want this trail to be through Unity's functionality. Lastly, we're going to be actually going over the particle system in this tutorial today through some implementations. Line render and trail render, we aren't actually going to be going over in today's tutorial, but our particle system will be. So these are collision, explosion, trails. Honestly, there's a ton of things you can do with Unity's particle system to generate different particle effects. So there's a ton of uses, a lot of parameters. Honestly, I don't know all these parameters, but we'll be going over some of the important parameters, such as like duration, looping, lifetime, and star size. So uh, so we can go ahead and get started into the tutorial now. So this is the tutorial package that I've imported right here, doing a brief recap of what we've gone over in the previous tutorial. Uh, we can just run around and look different directions. The way in which I move my mouse changes the direction in which I'm looking in, and we can see our character running around in the scene. So we can go again. We can go ahead and get started with some basic FPS functionality. So in something key in every FPS is a reticle. It's basically what or how we aim our gun, and it allows us to see the center of the screen to know where our bullets are going to be landing. So to create a basic reticle, we can right click in our hierarchy, go to UI and select image. And this is going to create a blank image on the bottom left of our screen. So make sure to have this anchor set to the center right here. And we can set the position values to 0, position of X to 0, and position of Y to 0 to get in the center of our screen. We can go ahead and name this reticle, and we can go ahead and do a little bit of tweaking to customize a reticle to however we want it to be. So this is a little big for my liking, so I'll change it to a width of 10 and a height of 10. White is it's pretty hard to see a reticle right now. Personally, I like using cyan reticles whenever I'm playing FPS shooters. So I'll go ahead and change the color of the source image or the color of the image to cyan. And honestly, I'm not a fan of the square reticles. I prefer dot reticles personally. So if we go to source image, head over to the sprite and select knob, it'll create a little circle reticle over here. So if we go ahead and play our game, oh, uh, yeah, we can see our reticle on our screen. I'm gonna go ahead and change the size to be a little smaller because it's a little big. Now next up, something else that's pretty essential in FPS shooters is the ability to see your gun at most times. So right now when I'm running around, I'm not able to see my gun. I just see my reticle, and if I try like shooting something, I won't be able to like have the gun there to see. So if we go ahead and head over to our scene, we can double click or click on our gun to uh, actually see where it's located or how our gun is being manipulated. So our gun is basically this AR low object within all this pretty complex hierarchy of this character that we imported. So if we go ahead and drag uh, this AR low gun into our main camera, we'll make it such that this gun is a child of our main camera, so it'll move alongside our main camera. So if we're moving up or moving our cursor up or down, left or right, it'll move alongside our camera or whichever direction we're facing. So we can go ahead. So if we press play right here, we can see that we don't see our gun right here, but if you look over at our scene, we can see that the gun's moving alongside our cursor movements, but it's in an awkward situation, or awkward position. So I'll just change it to some values, which I found to fit the screen pretty well. So an X of 0.4, a Y of negative 0.34, and a Z of 0.21, as well as a rotation of negative 3.1, Y of negative 8, as well as a Z of 1.5. So if we go ahead and press play, we can see our gun moving along with our cursor. We currently don't have it animated right now, but this is basically like a hackish way to see your gun alongside your cursor or your reticle and move it accordingly. So moving on to our next part of the tutorial, we can go ahead and start creating targets to start shooting. So if we head over to our assets page into our scripts folder, we could open up the target tutorial.cs folder. So when we're creating a target, basically what we have right here, public game object, new object. This is to create a new this is getting a new object later on for this last part of the tutorial. So next up, this serialized field head camera. This is also for the part of the tutorial over here. But let's go over to our first to do, which is to initialize our HP. So we can say public float HP equals 1F. So we're making this variable public so we can change it or alter it however we like. And we're setting it to 1 right now as an initial value. Now in our public void take damage function, we want the target to take damage whenever it is shot. So we want to decrease the HP and invoke the die method if the target should die. So here we can say HP minus equals amount, and this will subtract whatever amount we want to subtract when the target is shot. And next we can say if our HP is less than or equal to 0, then we could invoke our die function. So in our die function, it's pretty simple. We just want to destroy the game object. And we can move on to this if there's new time or if there's more time later on. So we've created our target script, and we can go ahead and continue now by creating an actual target. So if we right click here, create a 3D object, and let's make a sphere. We can call this sphere target and drag on our target script into it. Give me 1 second. I need to rename this to target tutorial and this one as well. So if we go ahead and drag on our target tutorial script onto our sphere, we can see that it has some variables right here. And if we want to make it more like a target and not just a sphere, we can change some of the scaling. So we can change our Z to be like our Z to be like 0.1 to get like a flat target like object. And then we can also change the color as well. Or I guess we can just leave it gray for now. So now we have a target, but we don't really have a way to shoot our gun. So we can go ahead and move on to our fire gun tutorial script. So I can go ahead and start explaining some of the features of our fire gun tutorial script. So we're calling a serialized field camera head camera right here, and this is going to get our head camera because we want the direction in which where the player is facing. We're getting a particle system right here, particle system muzzle flash for our later on when we implement the particle system. We want to create a muzzle flash effect. Additionally, we have our game object impact effect. So that's going to be such that we create impact whenever we shoot something. So a little like burst of particles will come out. Next up, we have our input action fire action. So this will get our input for whenever we're firing the gun. So a lot of what I've already written here is what we've done in the previous tutorial, which is using Unity's C# events to get player inputs. Let me go ahead and go to our robot player and our player controls. We can go ahead and add a new action over here, and we can call it or right here, this fire action equals get component is finding the action map of the player and finding the action of clicking. So this is gonna mean that whenever a player clicks, we'll be able to register a fire action as that click, so we can get whenever a player shoots their gun. So moving on to our handle fire function, uh, we're going to be defining a raycast variable to store later. So we call raycast hit. And right here we have a placeholder bool set to true. So this placeholder bool is just going to be saying here we're just going to be creating a raycast from head to the direction the player is facing. So we can say if physics.raycast camera transform dot position, then head camera forward, and our last argument will be out hit. So we're calling the physics raycast function right here, and this returns a Boolean value, whether or not something is hit. So if a ray actually runs into an object, it will return true. So we're saying if something is actually hit, we'll run this control flow logic. So the arguments that physics.raycast takes in, there's like a lot of different ways you can call physics.raycast, but the way in which we're using it right here, we're taking in head camera dot transform dot position to get the position that we want the ray to start in, and then we have head camera dot transform dot forward, which is the direction in which we want to shoot the ray, and our out hit is saying that if we actually hit a variable we want to store, or if we actually hit an object we want to store that in our hit variable, which we define right here. So let's go ahead and log the name of the object that was hit. So we can say debug.log hit.transform.name, and this will help later on with debugging and making sure that we're actually hitting objects. Next up here, we want to get a reference to the target that was hit. So we can say target or target tutorial target transform, and then target. So right here, what we're doing is that we're getting whatever we hit before when we stored into our hit variable, we're getting like the reference to what was actually hit. So next up, we can say if target is not equal to null, so meaning if we actually hit a target, then we can say target dot damage. So we can deal 1 damage whenever we can deal 1 damage to the target if we actually end up hitting a target. So these variables right here deal with our particle system, which we can look at later on. Okay, so if we go ahead and drag our fire gun tutorial script into our robot player, then we can see right here that we're able to drag onto our main camera into our head camera and we can start testing it out. So okay, so we want to make sure to include our shooting in our player controls. So if we head over to our robot player input, and double click our actions for our player controls, we can create a new action and we can call it click, and then we can bind that to our mouse and then the mouse press. So if we go ahead and save that and press play, then whenever we press our click, we can see that it's logging in the console our ground. The current errors that are popping up are because of what we have over here in our fire gun tutorial, but over here we're going to be instantiating our impact game objects right here whenever when we get to that. But right now we just want to verify that our target our shooting is working. So we're creating rays, and it's outputting our ground right here in the console. And if we shoot our target, then it'll disappear because our target only has 1 HP, and since we shot it, it deals 1 HP whenever we shoot a target, it disappears. So next up, we can go ahead and start implementing some features of our particle system. So head over back to, or if we head back over to our firegun tutorial script, we want to play our muzzle flash. We haven't created it yet, but we want to play our muzzle flash whenever we shoot the gun. So regardless of whether it hits anything, we want to say muzzle flash dot play. And then next up, we can say game object impact. We can delete that line right there. Game object impact game object equals instantiate. So since we want to instantiate an impact effect whenever we shoot something, we can say game object impact game object equals instantiate impact effect, and then hit dot point. So this is the point at which our hit variable that we stored before whenever we actually hit something is. So that's that location right there. And then our last argument that we put in is quaternion and the quaternion that we're putting in is quaternion dot look rotation, and then hit down normal. So this is how we want our particle effects to be instantiated, or the direction in which we want it to be. So we're saying quaternion dot look rotation hit dot normal because we want the particles to shoot outwards. And whenever we say hit dot normal, they'll get the outward direction in which regarding like the direction in which the object that we hit or is facing. So we can get that burst particle effect whenever you hit a target or hit an object. And the reason, again, explaining this in a little more depth, the reason why we're doing if target not equal to null here is because we're checking if we actually hit a target. This overlying if statement right here is checking if we hit something. So if we hit the ground, we want to do something. And if we hit the target, we want the target to take damage. And then afterwards, we want to destroy our impact game object. And then we want to destroy it after a certain amount of time. So let's say 2 seconds. So right here we have our logic for our particle system. So let's go ahead and try implementing that. Okay, so to create a particle system, we can go ahead and right click in our hierarchy and go to effects particle system. So immediately we can see the particles being created by the particle system we just created. So we can see these particles. We see these particles constantly being created, and they're later on destroyed. So we can name this particle system Muzzle Flash right now. So we can do our Muzzle Flash particle system first. So we want to create this Muzzle Flash under our under like where our gun actually shoots. So we can go to our main camera and go to our gun. And if we head over to fire point, we can see that this location is exactly where the barrel or gun ends. So we want to be creating this muzzle flash effect right over here. So if we drag over this particle system right here, we can see that the particles are being generated right next to or right around this fire point area of our gun. So now we can start by manipulating the properties of our particle system. You can see a ton of different properties right here. Some of them more important than others. Honestly, I don't know what a lot of these factors do, but we can I can go ahead and start explaining some of the more important ones. So duration right here is how long we want our particle system to last. So we want our entire particle system to last for 5 seconds. We can set it to 5 seconds, but we have like looping right here set to true, so it's constantly just in a loop. So if we uncheck that, we can see that it stops running because it's no longer looping. Next up, we can see um, our some other functions right here. Start delay, start lifetime. So lifetime is going to be how long the particle lives. So whenever a particle is spawned through the particle system, how long does it last? And then we can create a delay on when we start generating the particles and a speed, so like the velocity, how fast we want our particles to be moving. And then there's a size, how big we want our particles to be. Um, there's like a color, so we can change how we want, or we can change what color we want it to be. So for a muzzle flash effect, we can create a color, something like a yellowish color. So I'll change it to something around here. Next up, we can start changing some other values. So I don't want this effect to last very long. So we can set the duration to be like 0.2 seconds. And we also don't want our particles to be living a very long time because we want this muzzle flash effect to be instantaneous since it's a bullet being spawned, or since the gun's being fired instantaneously, then the flash only lasts for a very short amount of time. So we want the lifetime of these particles to be 0.06. And we don't want it to be too fast, so or it doesn't really matter too much, but I like changing the speed to around 1 to get a slower kind of particle effect, but it shouldn't really matter too much regarding this area, or regarding this muzzle flash effect. We can go ahead and change the size as well. So if we press play, we can see the particle being generated. So um, we can go ahead and change the size to maybe something a little smaller. So we can make it like 0.2, or I guess we can just leave it to 1. It works pretty well. We can change the properties later on, of course, but moving on, we can go ahead and uncheck play on awake. So whenever our game starts, this is play on awake. So we don't want our particles being spawned immediately because there isn't going to be any muzzle flashing when we automatically spawn into the game. Next up, we can see some of these other properties right here. And these are some of the main properties, but also the other properties that are important regarding particles are your emission. So this is how particles are emitted from uh, the particle system. So right now, our emission is set to 10 rate over time and rate over distance. So this is how our particles are emitted over time. So currently we don't have um, we have a rate of over time of 10. So we have our particles emitting like 10 at a time. And then we have our rate over distance, which is set to 0. So we currently aren't changing the rate over distance. So next up, we can change our shape. So the shape of the particle, the muzzle flash effect we want is actually going to be a cone. So we can leave that there. But the angle, since we want it directly on our gun fire point, we can change the angle to 0. And then we could additionally change our radius to something extremely small because we don't want it to be shooting out in various directions. We just want that muzzle flash to appear right here consistently at the same time. So basically what this is changing is like the shape of the cone in which particles are going to be emitted. So if we decrease these variables as such, we're making sure that there isn't any variation in the way in which we're spawning particles. So we can go ahead and leave the other factors as so. And when we press play, we can see that our particle is being spawned down there consistently. We can go ahead and move this a little up to see our particle being spawned a little to the side right here. Maybe change the direction to the left. and edit it just however you'd like to see a particle effect in the game. So this is kind of a little muzzle flash that's happening at the barrel of the gun right now. But something else that's pretty important when it comes to muzzle flashes are lights. So this is kind of a weak particle effect right now, but then if we add a light to it, it'll be much more flashy. So if we can go ahead and right click our muzzle flash and then go to light and point light, and we can, this is just creating a little point light that we can turn on and off depending on uh, our muzzle flash. Whenever a particle effect is triggered, we can call this light to be triggered as well, so it'll start flashing. We can go ahead and start by changing the position. We can make our Y position a little further down, and then we don't really have to change these factors. We can just leave the light as is and head over to our muzzle flash. And then regarding light over here, we can drag in our point light. And some of the variables over here when it comes to light can be a little complicated. So ratio is how much, how often you want this light to be put into effect whenever we spawn our particles. So this time we have 0 times. So this says that we want our light to flash 0 times um, out of however many times we want. So if we set this to 1, we can see that our light plays at every single shot. But if we change to something like 0.5, the light doesn't always spawn. It spawns only half the time because there's a 0.5% or a 50% chance that it actually spawns. So since we want it spawning every time, we'll change it over to 1. These other factors really aren't going to affect it too much since our particle is, or since our light's going to be spawned every single time. So we can see it over here whenever we play a particle effect, we can see that muzzle flash in effect. Next up, we can move on to our next particle system, or we can go ahead and start playing the game to see it in effect. We have to go ahead and head over to a robot player and drag in this muzzle flash into our fire gun tutorial script within the inspector. So if we start playing, okay, so we're getting some errors before because we're trying to instantiate our impact object. We haven't created that yet in our fire gun tutorial script. So moving on, we're moving back to our tutorial area. We can try testing out the muzzle flash effect. So we can, whenever we press shoot, we can see our little particle system come into effect. But right now we have our light constantly turned on, so we can't see that light effect take place. So if we uncheck point light over here and press play again, we can see our little muzzle flash effect going. So this little light that pops up, or that flashes for a second, and the little particle on the end of our muzzle. Next up, we can go ahead and start creating our particle system for the bullet impact. So head over to effects, particle system, and we can call this bullet. Now we can go ahead and start changing up some of the features over here. We want to uncheck looping since we don't want it to be looping all the time. And then we can change our duration, or we can just leave duration the way it is right now, actually. But we want to make our lifetime really small. So if we change it to something like 0.1, we can get a really short lifetime. We can leave speed as it is right now because we want the bullet impact effect to be fairly fast, since the bullet's moving fast itself, and whatever comes off of the impact, we want it to be fast as well. And then we can change the size. 1 is a little big, so if we change it to 0.1, we play, we can see the little particles going. Next up, we can change the color. Bullet impact, I like to do like a yellowish color as well, because the particles would be fairly bright because of the way in which the gun's being shot and objects are being hit. Next up, we can go ahead and change some of the other properties, or we can first uncheck play on awake, and we can change our emission properties so we can see how our particles are being emitted over time and distance. So first off, we can start off by changing the rate over time. So here we do want a burst effect, and we want it over time of 0.1 seconds. So we want all the particles to be emitted over this really small amount of time. And then we can create a burst. So 30 is a little high for the amount of particles, but we want 20 particles to be created in this burst, in this emission. Um, over explaining again one more time, the rate over time is like how many or how this like burst, how the particles of this burst are emitted. So if we change it to a really large amount of time, the particles can be emitted uh, intermittently over a longer period of time. But since we're making it really short, we're getting really strong burst effect of all the particles being emitted over this really short period of time. Now, cycles right here is how many cycles we want our burst effect to be created. We only want one burst effect. It's a single impact, so we leave that as at 1. And our interval and probability values will change. The interval in which our particles are being created in 0.01 seems fine, and our probability is how often, or the probability of a particle being actually emitted, and we want all these particles to be emitted, so we'll leave that as 1. Now moving on to our shape. Usually since we actually want some variation in our particle effect, we can start pressing play to see how it is. So if we restart it, we can see a little burst of particles. We want some randomness to this burst, so we can leave the angle the way it is uh, as 25, but we don't really want the particles to be expanding over such a wide radius right now, since as you can see on the screen, it's pretty wide, and we want our impact effect to be a little smaller. So we can change our radius to 0.1. And if we restart our particle effect, we can see it's over a smaller radius. So that's pretty decent for our for impact effect. We can go ahead and move that. We can go ahead and move on and move that into our player. So if we scroll down to our fire gun tutorial script in our inspector, we drag this bullet impact into the impact effect. And if we start playing our game, we have to head back actually into our firegun tutorial.cs and uncomment out this code. So we actually have our explaining one more time what this does is that we're creating the game object impact game object. So what we're doing is we're making a game object and we're instantiating specifically the impact effect that we defined earlier over here. So this impact effect, so when we call the instantiate function, we're instantiating impact effect, and we're instantiating the particle system at the point that we hit, and then at this loop rotation. So the normal, so we want it pointing outwards. So saving that, heading back over to our tutorial scene, we can see, we can try playing the game and seeing how our bullet impact system works. Okay, so I went ahead and changed a few things. So first off, I changed the position of the muzzle flash to 000. I went ahead and changed the color of the target to red. And so making these changes made it such that the muzzle flash will appear a little closer, and additionally changed the size of the muzzle flash to be a little smaller because it was a little zoomed out before. So now it's directly on our muzzle, and such that it's spawning a little smaller. Now I just changed the material of the target to be red, um, and then additionally added the other components. So after um, after you drag in the bullet impact effect and press play, and shoot the ground, you can see the little particle system pop up. And it's generating these particles based on wherever we shoot. So shooting the ground creates a little impact effect right here. So walked up to a target, shoot it, you see a little particles shoot out from the target. Yeah, so yeah, this is our little impact effect that we created through our particle system. Now lastly, as a little bit of a side quest or something you can do on your own. It's a little boring just shooting a singular target as a game. So you could head into your target tutorial script and change it such that you can change the target and like spawn new targets whenever a target is destroyed. The reason why this game object, new object here, and this camera option is here is so that you can spawn a new target in front of you or around you each time the target's destroyed. So implementation of this is already included on our GitHub repository. It's just like 3 or so lines of code to instantiate a new target each time the target's destroyed. And the way it looks in our game is you see the target and if you shoot it, it spawns a new target over here, and then it just spawns a new target in this little quadrant, so that you can just keep on shooting it and destroying it. And it's instantiating a new object every single time and destroying it as well. So this is like aim lab if you've played that before, and just and you're just shooting a target that's continually spawning through raycasting. So that's about it for the tutorial. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, ask in the tutorial help section in our Discord, and I hope you enjoyed.